was from a police station. My people. And yeah, it's great. Because I was on the highway.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Sarah Taylor Peck. I'm also the great niece of Russell Peck. We're gathered on this holy ground to honor Russell Albert Peck. We've gathered here to praise God and to witness our faith as we celebrate the life of Russell. We gather in grief, acknowledging our human loss. May God grant us grace that in pain we may find comfort, in sorrow we may find hope, and in death, resurrection. All of you are here because you have a story about Russell. You're here because he impacted your life. He was someone who showed up. I remember him reading a poem at my wedding and bearing witness to the baptisms of my children, standing in the gap as a grandparent after my grandfather, his brother, passed away. We all have a story to tell about Russell. Today, you'll hear some of these stories. Today is just a beginning. We start the practice of sharing memories, describing his idiosyncrasies, and it doesn't end here. May this service be a launching pad for the continued tradition of remembering dear Russell, celebrating all that he was, all that he taught us. Because when we do this, his spirit will live on in God's eternal heart, where nothing is ever forgotten. Will you join me in the spirit of prayer? O spark of creativity, O source of energy, O infinite melody, God. We gather today as a group of people who are marked by the influence and inspiration of Russell Albert Peck. For some, we've come from a long line of Riverton Peck descendants. We've picnicked and played on the very soil that taught Russell how to work hard, milking cows before sunrise on the family farm. Some are here because Russell fell in love with a pianist, married her in Paris, and were part of the legacy they built over 64 years of marriage. We're woven into the story of tapping maple trees for syrup, singing around the piano in 4-part harmony, and cultivating wild gardens. Others are here because Professor Peck taught us how to read poetry, how to enjoy theater, how to critically encounter Middle English literature, and because he convinced us that fairy tales are worthy of our attention. We gather today to remember Russell, to honor his life, to tell his stories, to sing, and above all, to preserve the imprint he made on our hearts. O author of creation, O teacher of meaning, O comforter in our grief, God. 89 years doesn't feel long enough. So remind us that today, as we gather to say goodbye, you have said hello. Welcome home, good and faithful servant, and well done. Amen.
A time for everything. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before. And God will call the past to account. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. I said to myself, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time to judge every deed. I also said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals.
Hello, I'm Nathan Russell Peck, and since February 20th, I've often found myself thinking about situations and experiences through a Russell A. Peck filter. So the title of my speech today is, If Dad Was Here. If Dad was here, I would tell him all about the innumerable people who sent condolences and shared Russell stories after his death. They were truly remarkable and heartfelt and greatly appreciated by everyone in our family. In these remembrances and tributes, Dad was frequently described as a force of nature, which was exciting for me because I've spent every day of the last 39 years educating teenagers about the forces of nature. And although I never actually mentioned my dad once in my science teaching, if we think metaphorically about forces as being agents of change, then Dad certainly was a force that positively influenced and augmented all of our lives. Take a moment to think about the time when Dad did this for you. A ubiquitous property of natural forces is that they always come in pairs. For every action or force in nature, there's an equal and opposite reaction. We're going to illustrate this quite simply. You need to hold your hands out in front of you like this. And I'm going to count it down, 3, 2, 1, and then you can bring your hands as close together as possible at the count. 3, 2, 1. Excellent. Your right hand adds a force to your left and your left to the right, equal and opposite. And as is the true nature of forces, I think altogether we were as influential in Dad's life as he was in ours. If Dad was here, I know we'd want to thank each and every one of us in the room for enriching his life, giving it meaning and purpose, and allowing him to live his life at its best, a full life. And of course, there's nobody in the room who's been a bigger force in my dad's life, and vice versa, than my mom, Ruth Demery Peck. As a pair, Russell and Ruth gave each other tremendous support throughout their lives together, as Sarah mentioned, 66 years. And especially during the pandemic, when they were isolated, the strength they gleaned from each other was a wondrous sight to behold. After Dad's stroke, Mom was amazingly supportive of him and the whole family, never leaving his side. Mom, if Dad was here, he would be so proud of the way you're facing new challenges and adapting to your new St. Louis home. I am too, and it just makes me want to hug you all the time. A hug with a back scratch. Well, we established that we can clap in church, so let's give Mom a round of applause. By the way, there are cards with Mom's new contact info near the guest books. I realize that some of you, including myself, may interpret the dad as a force of nature description coming from a little different angle, as in Dad's occasional practice of forcing people out of their comfort zones. And I'm reminded of a childhood experience I think typifies Dad's modus operandi at times. It was the fall of 1971. I was 9. My brother Gunther was 7. When Dad announced that he would help us in making Halloween masks. And we had never had masks before, and so we were excited and agreed. So he made us lie down on the living room floor, and he covered our faces with saran wrap. Fortunately, Mom reminded him to cut holes in it by our mouths. He then proceeded to take newspaper strips, salt, flour, and water, and he papier-mâché'd our faces. The worst part was having to lie on the carpet for about an hour while it set. Afterwards, he spruced up the face masks with strips that came down the front and some up on top. And if only he'd just spray painted it all yellow, Gunther, we could have gone as Dad's sons. But instead, he went with gray, and when it was over, the masks truly looked hideous. I'm not really sure what they were. Shortly thereafter, and well before Halloween, Dad announced that we had the opportunity to practice our Halloween costumes at a dinner party he was having at a place called the Medieval House. All I heard was Evil House. So we get there, and Dad's put some old sweaters on us and stuffs a couch pillow up off on the center of our backs, gave us a couple of old tin cups, and then demonstrated how we were to hunch over, shimmy up to adult strangers, interrupt their conversation, and say, "Alms for the poor! Alms for the poor!" I had no idea what an alm was, and I was petrified to speak to strangers. This is literally, as a kid, someone would ring the doorbell and I would sprint up to my room and hide. Talk about out of comfort zone. But then, to our surprise, people laughed, they reached into their pockets, and put coins and currency in the cups. And Dad said we could keep it. He literally took a page out of an Oliver playbook and trained his boys for our first jobs as child beggars. It was one of the best days of my childhood, and Gunther and I split the $35 down the middle and spent it almost all on 1971 Topps baseball cards. If my dad was here, we definitely would have tapped him for giving one of these speeches. And you might be thinking, yeah, like this one. And I agree. So that's what I'm going to do. I am going to recite one of Dad's speeches. And this is not the speech. This is Dad's CV that I found on his desk. It's 58 pages long, and 20 of the pages are just listing titles of speeches that he's made. I'm not going to do that. The one I'm going to do, you probably have not heard. I think there's only one person who's heard this speech before, and unfortunately, she could not make it. That's Dad's sister, Judy. But this may be Dad's first public speech ever. Before he went to college, it's his high school valedictory address to the class of 1952 in Riverton, Wyoming. Before I do, here's a little background. Dad was one of 6 children born to Leroy and Elvira Peck, kid number 5, in the height of the Great Depression. The family business was the Morning Star Dairy, and life on the farm was frugal. When his older brothers, Roy and Bob, enlisted in World War II, Dad was still 9 years old. But he was heavy enough to depress the clutch on the tractor when he stood on it. So began his life as a farmer, milking the cows, shoveling poop, digging ditches, driving the tractor, delivering milk. When Roy and Bob came home as decorated war veterans, they worked in the newspaper business, the Riverton Ranger. And a notably common practice in rural communities is that the youngest son, Dad in this case, as the heir apparent to run the farm and dairy. But Dad was also a stellar intellect. He was a devout reader. He was an excellent student, and he had a very helpful aunt, our Aunt Maggie, who fed Dad's hunger for literature. So Dad typed out his valedictory address on the back of Morning Star Dairy notice cards. I just want to read this one. Notice to our customers. We are eliminating our Sunday delivery in order that our plant workers and delivery boy, Dad, might have a day off. Exactly. I was shocked. Dad, with a day off? There's no way. There's no way. He went into work. I also memorized the phone number for the dairy on the back. It's 86. Okay. So just a little bit of warning on this. Dad only uses male pronouns in the address. That threw me off a little bit when I first read it. But then I thought, in some ways, Dad was writing this address to himself. And I shared that thought with my brother Gunther, who then read it himself, and thought that maybe Dad was really writing this speech for his father, Leroy. Either way, I'm going to pretend that I'm my dad, string tie helps, and you're the Riverton, Wyoming graduating class of 1952. He titled his talk to Life at Its Best. How can I attain life at its best? This is a question that has troubled man throughout the ages. Life at its best. In what way can we approach this chimerical destination? Due to the proximity of the occasion, I would like you to think along the lines of education as a means of a more abundant life. Some time ago, while reading Plato's The Republic, Maggie, I came across an illustration that I think is very fitting for the occasion. The scene is a cave with a fire burning outside the entrance. Guards are between the fire and the cave entrance, and prisoners are within. The den, the prisoners, the light at a distance, the low wall, and the moving figures of which the shadows are seen on the opposite wall of the den. The prisoners would mistake the shadows for realities, and when released, they would still persist in maintaining the superior truth of the shadows. When dragged upwards, they would be dazzled by excess of light. At length, they would see the sun and understand its true nature. They would pity their old companions of the den, but when returned to the den, they would see worse than those who had never left it. The prison is the world of sight. The light of the fire is the sun, and you will not misapprehend me if you interpret the journey upwards to be the ascent of the soul into the intellectual world. Nothing extraordinary in the philosopher being unable to see in the dark. The eyes may be blinded in two ways, by excess or defect of light. The conversion of the soul is the turning around the eye from darkness to light. First, having once tasted the fruit of education, one becomes unsatisfied with life and craves more. Then as his education and intellect increase, he enjoys life more and more. Education provides satisfaction. But how can I carry on my education? Probably the first answer that comes to your mind is college. Important? Yes. All important? Yes to some and no to many others. A college diploma provides the requirements of many positions. It provides the student with a condensed mass of knowledge into which he can delve as deeply as he wishes. It will enable him to go into a specialized field if he so demands, but always it gives him the satisfaction of accomplishment. Or perhaps you plan to enter your life expedient immediately. You will work your way up, and with each bit of knowledge you attain, you will advance and become more satisfied. But the one who cares not to learn, who wastes his time, leans on the other fellow, will be left behind, feeling sorry for himself and will have no satisfaction. He may think he's happy, living carelessly, immorally, or perhaps boastfully, or maybe even derisive of those who strive forward, but he does not have the satisfaction of achievement. His happiness is cheap and shallow. He doesn't have that feeling of being worth something. He doesn't understand the fullness of life. We can further our education by keeping ourselves up to date on all world happenings, by reading good periodical literature, by keeping an open mind. Be able to accept changes, be able to distinguish between the right and the wrong, and perhaps the hardest of all, be able to accept criticism and evaluate them for what they are worth. We have completed 12 years of schooling, we have graduated from high school, and we are on our own. Our parents and faculty fellow students have given their time and energy to prepare us for this thing called life. We owe them a great deal and thank them sincerely. We can repay them by accomplishing something worthwhile in life. We have tasted of the fruit of education. We are now on our own. Will we strive for more knowledge? Okay, fine. You had one part. It was to play the class of 1952. All right, we go back. Okay. We are now on our own. Will we strive for more knowledge? Yes. Will we make the most of our opportunities and use our talents to the best of our abilities?
Yes.
Will we approach life at its best?
Yes.
That, my fellow seniors, is up to each of us. If Dad was here, I'd tell him, awesome job, you did it. You most definitely lived your life to the fullest, a life at its best. And also, thanks for writing my speech.
You're now invited to stand. We're going to sing, Be Still My Soul. Hopefully you have an insert. Is there? No. All right. Give us one moment. One minute. Too high. Okay. Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change, he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best, thy heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, though dearest friends depart, and all is darkened in the vale of tears. Then you will better know his love, his heart, who comes to soothe your sorrows and your fears. Be still, my soul, your Jesus can repay. From his own fullness all he takes away. That was his mother's favorite hymn. It's been sung at many Peck funerals. Thank you for joining the tradition. Now we're inviting up Thomas Hahn.
Hi. I'm Russell's friend and collaborator from the Department of English. I first met Russell more than 50 years ago during my campus interview. He seemed quietly intense, engaged with a whole series of ideas, texts, and issues in ways that made for wonderful exchanges over dinner. The following fall, he invited me to sit in on one of his classes, and he seemed again the same person I'd met in March, standing quietly at the lectern, waiting for class to begin. As the precise second that the big hand hit 12, he exploded, reciting, singing, impersonating Chaucer's characters, even standing on the table at one point. I feared that this was a reconstructive memory, but just yesterday, a former undergraduate confirmed that Russell did this all the time. My first reaction was, I'll never be able to reproduce or follow this performance. I should start looking for a new job. Working with Russell, I soon learned that while he enjoyed his inimitable performativity, he warmly supported other styles of teaching, which allowed us to collaborate in undergrad classes, in his NEH seminars for teachers, and in many other impromptu events. There did come, however, an occasion when Russell definitely wanted me to clone his teaching persona. Ruth called early one Sunday afternoon and explained that they were at the hospital. Russell had awakened that morning with what was diagnosed as global transient amnesia, which left him without memories of the present or the immediate past. Ruth then said that he wanted to talk to me about his medieval seminar set for the next afternoon. Russell got on and, without a word spent on his situation, and for the better part of an hour, he showed himself fully able to plot out the moment-by-moment structure of a 3-hour graduate seminar that I was to teach in his place, asking continuously, "Do you see how this works?" Clearly, Russell's performative exuberance rested on carefully orchestrated rehearsals. One of Russell's gifts was his capacity to intuit as yet unrealized desires, convincing me and many others, many others, that there were things that I wanted and needed to do even though I hadn't yet become aware of them. Such desires might originate even in non-academic contexts. During a 1970s Thanksgiving at the Pecks, I mentioned to Russell a passing thought about renovating my attic. The next morning at 8:30 a.m., Russell was outside my house in his white van, informing me that we were headed to the lumberyard. We packed in a huge supply of 2x4s and 4x8 sheets of wallboard and dragged them up 3 flights of stairs to the attic, and then Russell left me to fulfill my previously unknown desire for renovation. In the late 1970s, Russell became enmeshed in the Chaucer bibliographies, publishing 2 massive and learned volumes for the series during the early 80s. Only gradually did I see this was also my desired future, taking on the role of general editor and ushering the series into the second decade of the 21st century. He next detected my desire that we should co-edit an anthology of medieval literature so massive that no publisher would take it on. In reaction, Russell concocted a grand plan for inexpensive, accessible, yet scholarly editions of complete medieval texts that would remain permanently in print. He knew, as I gradually discovered, that I, along with Alan Lupak, desired to be on the advisory board for the series and to produce our own editions for the Middle English text series known as METS, which became, in effect, the grandest anthology of medieval English ever. When the Chaucer bibliographies secured several multi-year program grants from NEH in the early 90s, Russell discerned a shared desire to seek national support for METS. He went on to win 7 extended grants that have provided unprecedented funding, underwriting more than 100 volumes over more than 30 years. Hard copies have now reached tens of thousands of readers, and on the METS open access website, millions of users from nearly 150 countries and language groups have read them as well. The METS project, which has more than once been called the single most influential and enabling enterprise for complex engagement with the Middle Ages, epitomized Russell's equal dedication to teaching and to learning, simultaneously at the highest and the broadest levels. Russell's passing has at some moments seemed to threaten medieval studies as we know it, at Rochester and in the wider world. But we all carry Russell with us in our hearts and our thought, and his presence and the desires that he has inspired in us will continue to shape and inspire new work. Thank you.
If you knew where Russell lived, then you knew he had a wild and beautiful garden. Let's stand and sing this next hymn in honor of something he loved. I come to the garden alone while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and he walks with me and he with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Now we're going to invite up Kat and Savannah, both sharing readings, and Demery. You can be seated.
Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. My sister will now read a poem, a copy of which you can find inside of your program.
The Pasture by Robert Frost. I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait to watch the water clear, I may. I shan't be gone long. You come too. I'm going out to fetch the little calf that's standing by the mother. It's so young it totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be gone long. You come too.
Looking back on the year we lived on our farm in Canada, my father, Russell Peck, reminisced in a 1974 interview. Since Wyoming, this was the first time that life was real. What was it about living close to nature that made life seem authentic? After Dad passed, I found his personal copy of Robert Frost and studied his annotations on The Pasture, one of his favorite poems, to plumb the dimensions of the pastoral vision that animated his life. I could easily see why Dad would be drawn to a poem about a farmer doing his spring chores. Having grown up amidst cow pastures on a farm in Wyoming, Dad surely identified with the poem's speaker, as he himself was likely sent out to fetch a newborn calf, or perhaps clear a spring or irrigation ditch for the cows to drink from. Whereas his parents, Leroy and Elvira, had bred cows out of necessity to keep the milk flowing at the Morningstar Dairy, Russell joined the Eastern Breeders Association shortly after purchasing the Canadian farm, out of a wish to recreate his boyhood experience for us children. Like the poem's speaker, who calls his friend to join him, I shan't be gone long, you come too, Dad summoned us more than once to behold the birth of a new calf and see it totter on its wobbly legs for the first time. Valuing physical labor, Dad was big on chores. He regarded the farm not as a vacation retreat, but as a boot camp designed to build self-reliance and self-sufficiency. Fortunately, he didn't demand that we kids rise at 5 as he had to milk the cows. Yet, if we weren't up and dressed by 7:30, Dad would blast box Brandenburg concertos as the wake-up call for a hearty breakfast before beginning our farm projects for the day. Whenever I tried to sunbathe on a lounge chair, Dad would summon me to a task. If I'd already watered the apple trees, collected the eggs, harvested the beans, or picked milkweeds for a penny a dozen, he would call out, "Demery, the parsley needs thinning." His Methodist work ethic put the Protestants to shame. You get the idea. We spent the summer of 1981 at the farm clipping cedar branchlets to sell by the ton to a mill that boiled them to make cedar oil for furniture polish. After I left for grad school that August, hands sore from all that clipping, Dad recalled the project with unqualified nostalgia, writing me in a postcard, "This has been a memorable and precious summer, truly an interlude which tied us together one time more as a family in our pastoral setting." Rereading this after his death, I realized that Dad didn't care about work for work's sake. Whether we were making sausage, plucking chickens, trimming trails, pulling out beaver dams, or making maple syrup, Dad cherished collective enterprises for strengthening close and enduring familial bonds. Dad read the pasture not simply as a call to work, however, but more significantly, as he jotted over the title, as, quote, "an invitation to come and see." The speaker invites a friend not to assist him with his chores, but merely to witness them. He himself is engaged in the act of seeing in stanza 1 when he stops to rake the leaves away and considers waiting to watch the water clear. Cross-referencing another Frost poem, For Once Then Something, in which the speaker kneels over a well, trying to see beneath its rippled surface some deeper truth, Dad recognized the act of water gazing in Frost poetry as a symbolic search for revelation. In the pasture, the speaker entertains probing nature for its elusive metaphysical truths as a quest he may undertake another day, and instead turns his attention in stanza 2 to more ordinary magic. If we take the tender image of the mother cow licking her calf as a manifestation of love, then perhaps the speaker finds a transcendent truth in the things of this world after all. Like the poem's speaker, Dad was both a doer and a seer. As the title of his Princeton senior thesis suggests, Dad himself aspired to living life as a, quote, pilgrimage toward perception. He always carried a camera around his neck because photography helped him see things more clearly. By encouraging me to discover marvels in nature, he sharpened my perceptions of organic beauty. He inspired my many nature collections by buying me guidebooks to identify shells, fossils, animal tracks, flowers, butterflies, and birds. Revealing bear and lynx tracks at the farm, he showed me how to make casts of them using plaster of Paris and an empty Morton salt container for a mold. Some animal traces were too big to capture in plaster. When Dad showed me the imprints of wolves rolling in the snow the morning after they attacked the young herd in the barn, I lay myself down in them and made snow angels, preserving in memory a feeling of unfettered feral freedom. Together, Dad and I made a flower press and a butterfly net. He pointed out trilliums and cardinal flowers, fritillaries and swallowtails, until I began to recognize them for myself. At first, I thought Dad's notion to freeze the butterflies was crazy. But his plan worked perfectly. The frozen butterflies served as models for my drawings and colored pencils, and then, sure enough, when I set them out on the woodpile to warm up, in the sun, they would come back to life and fly away. At a deeper level, Dad read the pasture as an invitation to see through the eyes of a poet. He imagined the speaker as a surrogate for Frost. Circling the word clean in line 1, Dad drew an arrow linking that key verb to a resonant Frost quotation he copied below the poem. "There are two types of realists," wrote Frost. "The one who offers a good deal of dirt with his potato to show that it is a real one, and the one who is satisfied with the potato brushed clean. To me, the thing that art does for life is to clean it, to strip it to form. In this context, Dad drew an implicit analogy between the speaker's cleaning of the pond and the mother cow's licking clean her calf, and the poet's figurative cleaning of his material as he takes the vast chaos and messy disorder of actual life and simplifies and distills it to its pure essence. Beside the second quatrain, Dad jotted, quote, a clarification of life, taking the phrase from Frost's well-known description of a poem in the figure a poem makes as something that, quote, begins in delight and ends in a clarification of life, not necessarily a great clarification, but a momentary stay against confusion. Dad saw the image of the little calf washed clean and finding its balance as a perfect incarnation of a poem's ideal conclusion as a clarification of life and a stay against confusion. Dad's additional gloss on the second stanza, quote, birth and cleansing, poet as midwife, suggests he saw a further analogy between the cow giving birth to her calf and the poet bringing to birth both calf and cow through his fresh and original words. Finally, next to the refrain, I shan't be gone long, you come to, Dad scribbled, poet as sharer. Scribbled poet as sharer, interpreting these final lines as the poet's own friendly, intimate invitation to his audience to spend a moment reading or listening to the poem. I like to think of my father as a farmer poet, attuned to evocative and mysterious miracles in nature. His vision of the pastoral was less naturalistic and scientific than idyllic, elegiac, and romantic. Through his imaginative perception, he crystallized nature's beauty and saw the interconnected unity of all things. One cold, clear December morning in 1972, shortly after dawn, Dad appeared out of the woods and beckoned me to join him. I've been out to clear the pond, he announced. You come too, and bring your skates. What is it? I asked, full of curiosity. It's a secret, he said. You have to come and see for yourself. Full of anticipation, I eagerly donned my yellow ski jacket, slung my figure skates over my shoulder, and followed him through the high grasses to the edge of the pond, only to see a lake of clear blue water with no sign of ice. I can't skate on that, I demurred. It's not frozen. You bet it is, Dad assured me. Just try it. Dad explained that the temperature the night before had dropped so precipitously that 3 inches of ice had quickly formed without any air bubbles, making it as transparent and smooth as glass. I put on my skates and cautiously glided out onto the pond on faith, feeling as if I were skating on water while simultaneously floating on air. For beneath my reflection on the virgin ice, I could clearly see at the bottom of the pond every water lily, pebble, and pointy beaver log, while superimposed over that, the unbroken reflection of the beaver house, surrounding trees and clouds. As sky and water fused to change places, I intuited Thoreau's epiphany at Walden Pond that, quote, heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. Spinning myself forwards and backwards in circles over the ice as Dad watched from a distance, I dissolved myself into a spiritual union with the cosmos. Dad gave me a priceless gift that day. He held up a mirror in the landscape through which I could see my original relation to the universe as part of an integrated whole. Skating on the pristine pond that morning at the age of 13, I recovered a sense of my own primordial soul and came into my own as a transcendentalist. My father was the pathfinder who guided me through nature and later through imaginative territories of literature. When I left home for Princeton, once again following in his footsteps, Dad sent me with many of his books, replete with notes. As a girl, I had hunted animal tracks. Now, as a college freshman, I pursued my father's penciled tracks through fertile literary ground, his old texts serving as my new guidebooks to the world of ideas. The books Dad passed down taught me to become a close reader and engendered many stimulating conversations between the two of us about literature and life, so that even now in his absence, I feel empowered to continue that conversation with him and with you. While I was a graduate student in English at UVA, Dad wrote me as often as 3 times a week to compare notes on scholarship and teaching. I would like to close by sharing 2 resonant excerpts from those letters. On August 26, 1983, when he was returning from his 25th anniversary trip with my mother to Paris, Dad wrote me a postcard listing all the academic tasks awaiting him at home: an essay to finish, a review to write for Speculum, more entries for studies in the age of Chaucer, and the final annotations for Volume 2 of the Chaucer bibliographies. Many would have felt burdened by such a workload, but not Dad. Quote, "Rather than work," he wrote, "the prospect of such activity seems like pure pleasure. There are real joys to scholarship, as you know, a beautiful, albeit luxurious privilege to work by yourself on something that's meaningful to you and a few others." 6 years later, in 1989, when I was teaching English in my first job as an instructor at Washington and Lee, Dad wrote, "Dearest Demery, how enormously happy you make us, and what a blessing and treasure you are to us. I wish we lived closer so that I could drop over and listen to you talk about Whitman or Dickinson. I'm glad you're enjoying your American literature class. What a daughter. And what a profession we have to be able to share such things with young people, people we don't even know, but whom we come to know through such things as poems and stories. I think that's probably the surest way to get to know anyone. My father's unconditional love and pride in me will sustain me always. It was my rare privilege to get to know my father better through poems and stories, and I hope that by musing upon his notes on one poem, I've helped you get to know him a little better as well. In the end, all I can say is, what a father. So as we don't have music here, I'm going to muddle my way through singing or leading Jesu Joy Man's Desiring. My memory on this has to go way, way back to the years we lived at the farm in the 70s when our family sang this as a group, like the Von Trapp Family Singers in church. If any other of my siblings would like to come up here, or Ruth, maybe? Anybody want to join me in leading this? Okay, I think it goes like this. We should stand. Okay, how about this as a pitch? Yea, Jesu, joy of man's desiring, holy wisdom, love most bright, drawn by thee our souls aspiring, soar to uncreated light. Word of God, our flesh that fashioned, with the love fire of life impassioned, striving still to truth unknown, soaring, dying round thy throne. Through the way where hope is guiding, hark what peaceful music rings, where the flock in thee confiding drink of joy from deathless springs. Theirs is beauty's fairest pleasure, theirs is wisdom's holiest treasure. Thou dost ever lead thine own in the love of joys unknown.
Now we're going to invite up Don Chu.
Hi, I'm Don Chu, an old friend of Russell and of course, Ruth. Hi, Ruth. Oh, there you are. Hi, Ruth. And I'm honored to be part of this celebration. This is a wonderful series of beautiful presentations. I spent 6 years at the U of R back in the 1970s, and these were 6 wonderful years as I look back on them. 4 doing a PhD in English, and the last 2 at the business school, at which point my mother started hounding me about getting a job. And since my focus was modern English and American Lit, a thesis on Melville, Conrad, and Faulkner, I never managed to take a formal course with Russell, but I have at least one pretty vivid memory of him from those days. I think it was 1975 or 76. Somebody in the development office must have talked Russell into giving a town and gown lecture on dragons and grammar, probably to show off the U of R's then brand new state-of-the-art Hubble Auditorium. And the night of the lecture, Russell had the U of R's brand new auditorium packed and rocking. As he started trotting out his endless series of dragon slides, each one illustrating with a sentence some part or figure of speech from English 101, and with each sentence getting a little crazier and each dragon looking a bit goofier and more adorable than the last one, Russell soon had the audience of townspeople and students feeding out of his hand, calling for more dragons. And so, some 30 years later, it was those dragons that came right to mind when I got a phone call from Russell asking me to be the treasurer of a group he'd long been running called the Consortium for the Teaching of the Middle Ages, or TEAMS for short. The mission of TEAMS was to crank out the series of Middle English texts that Tom Hahn told us about earlier. And so I said, sure, Russell, I'll do it, but on one condition. You have to try and dig up the slides for that dragon lecture you gave 30 years ago. I want to see how you worked your magic. And though I never saw the slides, the new job had unexpected benefits. As just one example, I've become increasingly fond of telling myself that as the editor of an obscure publication that I started over 40 years ago called the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance, and the subject matter is not nearly as hot as it sounds, you have to trust me on that, I've actually gotten pretty good at it. But Russell, after once sampling a few pages, paid me the supreme tribute. Don, let me congratulate you on having produced the first cure for the insomnia that I've long been afflicted with. Now, and that kind of praise, as you can imagine, went straight to my head. But as treasurer of TEAMS, I got to see in Russell a truly great editor in action, lining up and orchestrating the production of an amazing number of manuscripts, a task that involved cajoling and coddling a bunch of scholars. And let's face it, cajoling and editing is mostly what we editors do. Scholars that included everything from historians and sociologists to theater types and musicologists. Thanks to Russell's ability to coordinate all this work and to conjure an endless series of grants from the NEH that Tom told us about, TEAMS became that rarest of animals, a nonprofit that doesn't know what to do with all the cash that it's generating. And in leading TEAMS, as I love to tell people, Russell displayed all the most important qualities of a successful entrepreneur, but without a trace of the acquisitive instinct. But by far the greatest benefit from my new job was ensuring I'd now get to spend time with Russell and Ruth. I still remember the first of their visits to the Upper West Side apartment where my wife Sue and I raised our 3 kids. The year was 2006, and it was early evening of Friday, October 27th, when Russell and Ruth burst into our apartment in their customary foul-weather gear, dragging these very large suitcases, and Russell proclaiming in his best Princeton a cappella voice, "Hi, Don, we're here!" At which point, my youngest, Ben, then about 6, jumped behind me and cried out, "Dad, who are they?" Russell then put his hand on Ben's shoulder and said, "Hi, Ben, I'm Russell. Your dad tells me you're quite the baseball player. How about if you show me where your TV is, and you and I can go watch what I think is going to be a pretty good game while your dad fetches us a beer?" And Russell was right. What we saw that night was the St. Louis Cards, the Peck family favorite, closing out yet another of their obscenely large number of World Series championships by beating the Toothless Tigers of Detroit. So, let me stop for a second here. My sense that the Peck's first visit was off to a good start was confirmed early the next morning when Ruth announced her plan to take my dog Tilly, love of my life, for a walk down in Riverside Park just below. When Ruth returned from the walk to tell us, somewhat breathlessly, that she had no idea that New Yorkers could be so nice, Russell and I just laughed, and I reassured Ruth that the feeling she was now experiencing would soon wear off. And that was the first of what turned out to be some 15 annual fall weekend trips to New York for teams meetings by Russell, often accompanied by Ruth, which included taking in 2 or more mostly off-Broadway productions at places like the Irish Repertory. And this custom then led to what became for me another annual rite, that is sitting in on the tail end of the U of R's Theatre in London program. The Theatre in London program, which Russell and Ruth ended up running for over 30 years, became an accredited course that started a day or two after Christmas and ran till the middle of January. It involved all the logistical nightmares of getting 20-plus undergraduates to 1 or more plays a day in a strange city, along with Russell's morning lectures. And the plays we got to see had something for everybody, from Sophocles and Shakespeare to Sheridan, Sam Shepard, and Billy Elliot. And I recall sitting next to Ruth at a production of Matilda, with both of us trying to shield our ears from the sheer din, while both of us were thinking, why has Russell chosen to inflict this play on us? Do you remember that, Ruth? I did. All right. And I want to mention briefly here the role in Theatre of London of my former colleague, Janice Willett. We worked together at the Chase Manhattan Bank at the end of the 70s and then many years later at Morgan Stanley. Many of you know Janice as a trustee of the U of R, and you might also know that she and her husband Joe almost single-handedly endowed what I like to call the Russell and Ruth Theater Chair. Many of you probably also know that the holder of that chair, from its start in 2014, has been a guy with a funny accent named Nigel Meister. And I just want to add my 2 cents to all the well-deserved recognition he's gotten for his work as director of the U of R theater program for well over 20 years now. But back to the London program, in what must have been a dozen of these courses that we sat in on from 2006 on, Janice and I were both struck by the number of students telling us that the theater in London was their most memorable experience at the U of R. And I want to end with a few thoughts about what I found most memorable about Russell, both in the Theatre in London program and in almost everything we did. And you've heard extensive testimony to all this. What I especially admired, and I've never seen its equal, was the strength and persistence of his commitment to taking old things and making them new. Both in his writings and his action, Russell saw himself as a kind of modern medievalist, participating in and promoting an idea that he liked to call the family of Adam, the idea of a collective humanity that we're all part of, whether we know it or not. And that's what I saw him doing in his Theatre in London lectures each morning, discussing both the plays we'd just seen and those we were about to see. Using the crazy mix of contemporary and classic productions he put in front of us, Russell was always working, as he once put it, to recreate the past with the aim of rediscovering roots or derivations, and so using the past to shed light on the present. At his most mischievous, Russell liked to say, the problem is not whether the past is relevant, the thing is to make the present relevant. And I find this idea of making the present relevant wonderfully effective in conveying the sense of spending time with Russell and with Ruth. Ruth and Russell are people who instinctively think of themselves as part of the family of Adam, continually renewing old things, whether it's harvesting and planting trees in Ontario, teaching fledgling pianists, or introducing young people to the wonders of London theater. Last June, on the last night of what proved to be the last of their theater London trips together, Nathan and I were having dinner with Russell and Ruth in an outdoor restaurant next to the restored Globe Theater, just before the production of King Lear that we were about to see. And I had the sense of taking part in what, for me at least, what was a kind of Last Supper. Russell and Ruth both looked a little tired, which is not surprising since they just finished walking a mile with Nathan on the south shore of the Thames looking for seashells. But it turns out they were just gearing up for the last of the plays, while I sat with the other old folks in one of the upper tiers of the globe. I could only marvel as Russell and Ruth stood for the next 4 hours with their kids and grandkids in the pit area alongside the stage while watching at very close range a remarkable woman, barely 5 feet tall, playing King Lear. And that was my last glimpse of Russell. But when a bunch of us went back to London in March for what was the first theater in London trip without Ruth and Russell, an odd thing happened. At a brand new so-called immersive production of Guys and Dolls, a musical I didn't think I needed to see again, a cast made up almost entirely of Brits succeeded in taking this hackneyed old story of Depression-era New York City mobsters, with hearts of gold, of course, and getting a response from a young, mostly Brit audience that the Rolling Stones might have envied. How often do you get to see a large number of a cast of over 50 out dancing wildly with the audience after the show? And so when I was reminded the next day that Guys and Dolls was Russell's favorite musical, that just confirmed what I'd suspected, that if he was not actually still running the program, Russell was still having his way with us. He was still the guiding light. Thank you.
Now we're going to invite up Anna Seebeck-Larson.
My father also played Bach early in the morning to get us to go work outside. And I feel like we have a large enough sample size for some sort of family psychological study to happen. It's quite the experience. Right. I first met Russell after his ostensible retirement, when I interviewed for my position as the director of the Robbins Library and Kohler Collins Center for Medieval Studies here at the University of Rochester 6 years ago. More precisely, I first met Russell in person 6 years ago, as I was already deeply familiar with Russell as a scholar and shaper of the field of medieval English literature. I spent countless hours in graduate school working through volumes of the Middle English text series, thrilled that I could afford them because they were free. I passed numerous, and to me, very heavy hours with Russell's editions of Gower's Confessio Amantis when studying for my PhD exams, and I feel like now I can confess that I do not love Gower the way that Russell loves Gower. Russell's work on medieval theories of cognition was profoundly important in my own research, and it is not often that I meet someone who can match my collection of medieval brain diagrams. There are resonances between Russell on the printed page and Russell in person, a delight and precision in language, a joyful curiosity, a forceful passion, and a formidable intellect. So I was prepared, albeit somewhat terrified, to meet that Russell. What I didn't anticipate was the boundless energy, the profound kindness, the sly wit, or the familiar and comforting accent as I grew up, myself just a few hours away from Riverton. In other words, as soon as I met Russell in person, I had a sense of what his retirement looked like and what that might mean for me, and I was right. The months between that interview and my move to Rochester were filled with emails from Russell, invitations to a weekend at the Stratford Theater Festival with a schedule that I didn't believe was humanly possible, exciting news about a 16th century edition of Gower acquired for the library by Alan Lupac, my predecessor, ideas, or rather, I came to learn, directives for a possible lecture about that Gower volume, accompanied maybe by an exhibit, maybe multiple speakers, well, a symposium more than a lecture, nothing too much, but something really very special. I know that sequence is familiar to many of you. I was quickly drawn into a dance between the past and the future as I found myself imbricated in numerous Russell schemes to expand the library, to build Metz, and more, while also meeting generations of people who had been profoundly influenced by Russell as a teacher, scholar, and mentor, and were committed to carrying what they learned from him into their own communities. When I initially thought about what I would say today, I intended to speak about the extraordinary work Russell, with others, did here at the University of Rochester and within medieval studies. The creation of the Robbins Library, the Middle English text series, the creation and reformation of entire fields of study, theater in London, as we just heard about, the art and the flowers he brought into buildings and on university grounds. That work will continue upon the foundation that Russell helped build in collaboration with others, whether, as Tom said, they wanted it or not, or whether they realized they wanted it or not. But we all realize that it is what we want, eventually. But yesterday I had a conversation with a former student of Russell's that I have not been able to stop thinking about. She said, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, that he changed her life because he saw her. And that really resonated with me. I believe that Russell's empathy for people, past and present, drove him to build intellectual communities, communities of friends. Those communities and the connections we make within them across time and space are, to me, the bedrock of his legacy. Much medieval literature is structured on the idea or the figure of the circle, or perhaps rather a spiral, a return to a beginning point, while also moving forward, figuratively, spatially, sometimes temporally. So it is fitting for me to end, in a sense, where I began, back at that first day that I met Russell. In my talk on that day, I quoted John of Salisbury in his description of us as perched on the shoulders of giants. Quote, "We see more and farther than our predecessors, not because we have keener vision or greater height, but because we are lifted up and borne aloft on their gigantic stature." John Donne writes in Meditation 17 of his devotions upon emergent occasions, quote, no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. More than perhaps anyone I've ever met, Russell Peck was involved in humankind. His inquisitiveness and his joy in life, in people, in the richness and variety of experience undergird his legacy as the through line that brings together an understanding and appreciation of the past to those of us in the present, while inculcating in us an understanding of the imperative to share the joy and knowledge of the beauty and the pain of this life. While his death diminishes us, his life and his work elevate us. May we use our expanded vision to build upon his legacy of curiosity, empathy, and delight in the gloriously dappled world.
Now we have the honor of hearing Elijah and Gabe Fox Peck, two grandsons of Russell, play some music.
Check. How's it going, everyone? Let's see how this works. We're going to play a song called Georgia on My Mind. That was one of our grandpa's favorites, and he arranged for his a cappella group, the Princeton Boomerangs. Bench. All right.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through, just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Georgia, oh sweet Georgia, no peace I find comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pines. Other eyes smile tenderly, still in peaceful dreams I see the road leads back to you. Yeah, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pines, through the pines. Other arms reach out to me, other eyes smile tenderly, still in peaceful dreams I see the road leads back to you. Yeah, Georgia, 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 a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pines.
And now Gunther, their father.
Thank you. Music and beauty were at the heart of my father's good life. He fell in love with Ruth after he listened to her rehearse Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto when they were both graduate students at Indiana. He watched her hands, heard the symphony of sound and beauty they produced, and was struck. We, Nathan, Demery, and I, owe our very existence to that beauty. Music was not one thing for Dad, but many. When listening, music was a state of reverie, as when meeting Ruth or listening to grandchildren make their music. When making it, music was social and collaborative, generating arrangements like Georgia, 'Tis Autumn, she'll hear shortly, for the boomerangs, or a ritual of gratitude for hungry guests. For health and strength and daily food we give thee thanks, O Lord, before many meals. Or Dad's music was eruptive, startling all who were gathered. Oh, they say the northern lights have seen the queerest sights. Did they? The old Lake Lamar, they cremated Sam McGee. Unscripted, yes. Beautiful. Thank you. The cremation of Sam McGee, we all knew that he would burst into song, but we didn't quite know how and when. Dad's singing could also produce sublime reactions. When I first heard Dad belt out, Rosie, Rosie, good old-fashioned Rosie, I was 5, riding my bicycle with my family along a stone wall in England. His voice startled a couple hidden behind the wall, who jumped to their feet, unclad, with a look of genuine terror in their eyes. And I remember thinking at 5, was that Rosie? And is that old-fashioned? For my father, music and beauty were passions, deeply entwined with gardening. He loved words, spoken and sung, but he thought and he taught with his hands. Memories of him digging at 180 Crosman Terrace comprise some of the oldest memories I have. That small space has produced a staggering variety of color every spring, summer, and fall for the past 58 years. My father loved planting surprises, bulbs in odd places, interrupting your sense of what a lawn or a garden even are. As a child, I remember waiting for the snowdrops, the first real sign of spring in one corner of our backyard. This past February, when Dad died at home, snowdrops were popping up across the entire backyard, a lawn of thousands of little bulbs. Dad's favorite perennials were his dahlias, plants with such large blooms they literally fell over from the weight of their flowers, staggering like drunk theater-goers intoxicated by 2 plays a day. My father knew this about them, dahlias and theater-goers alike, and always planted his dahlias in bunches with tall tomato cages that collectively supported the weight of those brilliant fall blooms. And perhaps that's what the Harlingford was as a structure for that joy in theater. One of my dad's favorite harvests were making spectacular bouquets for the piano recitals for Ruth's students. Their beauty summoned inspiration, even as some students forgot their parts, or a dahlia bloom or 2 fell into the punch bowl. Dad was supremely happy at those events. Like a theater goer in London, like a student maybe in one of his own classes, my father knew that a beautiful table had been set, that all were welcome, that all would learn, novices and old hands alike. Russell understood that not everyone shared his aesthetic. That didn't stop him from trying. Joe Summers, friend, colleague, and neighbor of 40 years, who lived across the street from us, found his dahlias, as he put it, to be gaudy. Truth be told, I've sometimes wondered why Dad's gardens were so relentlessly full. Exotic perennial poppies elbowing out rhubarb and the odd, sad radish. Riverton's harsh climate, capable of having a killing frost every month, may have had something to do with this. When seen through the eyes of the Morningstar Dairy, his first gardening space, Russell's garden was indeed extravagant, rebellious even. To Dad, the riot of clashing color and food grown at 180 Crosman were, I think, the essence of freedom. Digging in solitude helped my father adjust to his world, thinking with his hands, dissonant and careworn as that world might be on occasion. He would emerge from digging calmer, with anxieties subdued or transformed, blooms replacing bishop's weed. Perhaps the volume of flowers in my father's garden matched the number of anxieties he sought to vanquish with dirt. As he grew older, Dad became more collaborative and joyful about gardening, and Ruth was his most steadfast companion as a gardener. Last fall, I helped them dig the dahlias and exercise in hope. I watched with admiration and wonder as Ruth and Russell, on all fours, sifted fine soil in silence or with quiet murmurings to each other, finding each and every tuber and nestling them into bags of dry peat moss for their final winter rest. I can still see, when I close my eyes, their 88-year-old hands working together in perfect synchrony. When my father was asked by a neurologist at Strong to look at his left hand and then to move it 4 days after surviving his massive stroke, he realized then that his able-bodied self, so central to his life's passion, love, and work, was now paralyzed. And yet, during those last 3 precious weeks of his life, Dad experienced life with the same rare intensity as before, but now with an even purer sense of gratitude. He listened to Tenderly or to Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, transfixed, or to Ruth playing. When he came home, he could not hold cards, but played pinochle anyhow, with confidence, superb timing, and help from Cody and Catherine. When he listened to poems read to him by family members or friends, by Anna, or when he listened to drama, including 3 acts of Hamlet read by Faulkner, Miranda, Gabe played 4 different people. He never blinked or paused or even asked for rest. He was rapt. Although he had difficulty swallowing, he relished fresh snow with maple syrup on it, letting that sublime mixture melt slowly across his dry tongue the day before he died. My father learned every day of his life. He learned the beauty and music is in us at every chance. When he died as he lived, beloved, holding Ruth's hand. In the end, he was not afraid of death, and he was certainly not afraid of dirt. Tomorrow, we will give away some of their handiwork at 180 Crossman, those arresting dahlias, 4 bags of them, living proof of the beauty that has for so long now been nurtured and cultivated generously at 180 Crossman Terrace.
Russell's grandchildren will now present some music.
And as several have hinted at now, our Grandpa Russell was in a quartet at Princeton called the Princeton Boomerangs, and this was a song that they sang and one of his favorite songs that he also mentioned at one point he wanted to be played at his funeral.
Is
turn our attention now to a multimedia remembrance that was put together by Gabriel Fox Peck, grandson.
Was he?
On what ground?
Take it over and make it the radical Republican Party that it used to be. You're doing a great disservice.
So there'd be no doubt. Called on the north winds to come on out. Then cupped his hand so proudly to shout. La-di-da-di-da-di-dum, 'tis autumn. The trees say they're tired, they're borne too much. Charmed all the wayside, there's no dispute. Now shedding leaves, they don't give a hoot. La-di-da-di-da-di-dum, 'tis autumn.
Then the birds got together to chirp about the weather. After making their decision, with a birdie-like precision, turned about and made a beeline to the south.
By holding you close really is no crime. Ask the birds, the trees, and old Father Time. It's just to help the mercury climb. La-di-da-di-da-di-dum, 'tis autumn.
We're nearing the very end of the service. After this, there's a reception that you're all invited to down at the river level. We're going to invite up in just a moment the 44 members of the Peck family who are here in 3 parts, singing the Alleluia chorus, with part 1 here, part 2 in the center, part 3 by the piano. We're now going to invite you to stand to receive this blessing before the Alleluia. And now, we go in peace with the assurance that neither death nor life, nor angels nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God that connects us to each other and to Russell, who now bears witness from the great beyond with all of our ancestors, those who have gone before us. And we go taking courage and comfort, knowing that one day we too will join the chorus of the eternal, the pulse of the universe, the promise of goodness and light. Amen and alleluia. Time for the party. Please join us.
I can't be very true because sometimes you just don't work. I'm like, what do you mean? And that's what I thought. I said, again, obviously, I just did it an hour ago. It's actually numbers and Ricky there, so I called him. What's the mice about this? And the other truck that had sent the cover, I haven't gotten it yet. Which I'd sent perfect story. It was all like just covered back there.